My name is Dorian Wells, and at 34 years old I stand every morning on the sun-baked patio of my Gulf Coast beach house and marvel at how far I've come. I built my digital marketing firm from scratch, one stuttering laptop, one coffee-stained desk, one sleepless night at a time, into something respectable enough to buy this slice of paradise. Every white stone brick and every pane of oceanfront glass is a testament to the 15-hour days, the failed campaigns that felt like final nails in a coffin, and the negotiations that left me punctured but unbowed. My parents, Victor and Nadine, taught me that grit outpaces talent when talent doesn't show up, and respect for others is the only currency that truly holds value. Their voices echo in my head whenever I consider taking the easy route, reminding me that nothing worth having comes free. My wife, Isla, was the breeze that carried me beyond those lessons. She grew up with a silver spoon balanced neatly between her fingers, but she never let that spoon turn her spine brittle. Her marriage proposal was neither extravagant nor embellished. It was a handwritten note tucked under my laptop at 2 in the morning, after I'd fallen asleep at my desk. "You deserve the world," she wrote, "and I'd like to share yours." When I fell in love, I fell hard and fast, believing entirely that our shared dreams would resist every storm. What I didn't know when I said, "I do," was that I'd married into not one but two households, each with its own rules, loyalties, and blind spots. On Isla's side, her parents, Alton and Diane, loved her fiercely and believed the world belonged to those who could bend it to their will. Consequences were optional if you were born under the right constellation. Entitlement was less a character flaw than a birthright. And while they welcomed me with polite smiles and flawless silverware, I felt from the very beginning that I was an import rather than an inheritance. Then there was Bianca, Isla's younger sister, all sharp angles and sharper opinions, who viewed my beach house as her personal playground. She was 24, freshly unmoored by a breakup and a pink slip from her latest temp job. She arrived in my driveway one evening, coiffed and caffeinated, and claimed she needed a weekend to clear her head. She moved in, suitcase in hand, with Alton and Diane offering a cheerleader's chant of encouragement. "She'll be fine, Dorian. Just some time with her big sister." I wanted to believe them. I wanted to trust that Isla's family would treat my home, my testament to hard work, with the same respect I did. But trust is a fragile thing. My parents didn't grow up with beachfront property or family brunches in a sunlit dining room overlooking the Gulf. They raised me on a steady diet of necessity, teaching me that respect is earned and that every privilege carries responsibility. So when I looked at Bianca's wide grin paired with Alton's dismissive shrug, something in me tightened. I reminded myself to stay calm, to remain the reasonable man they believed me to be. But inside, I wanted to roar that respect wasn't a courtesy reserved for the worthy, but the price you paid for every ticket to prosperity. That first family event in my home was an exercise in performance. I fought the urge to fold my arms when I saw Bianca lounge on my reclaimed wood coffee table, tapping at her phone like the cushions were her personal ottoman. I smiled politely when Diane complimented the minimalist decor, settling on the word serene, as though white stone exteriors and glass walls required a sermon to justify themselves. When Alton raised a glass, he toasted my generosity for sharing the house, as if the place had been gifted by fate rather than purchased with my own sleepless determination. Generosity. The word tasted bitter on my tongue. I studied Isla across the room, her laughter bright as sunlight dancing on water. I loved her for her kindness, for the way she insisted on including me in every part of her life, and for her stubborn belief that I belonged here as much as anyone. But love doesn't blind you to truth. Beneath her gentle insistence, I sensed a battle between loyalty and reality, between defending her sister and standing by my own values. And so I waited for the moment when the rift would appear, when entitled privilege would crash into earned pride, when the world Isabella's family had built around them would reveal its fragile facade. That moment came quietly, almost innocuously, in the form of a text at midnight. "Thanks again for letting us stay, Dorian." It was perfect. Hugs and kisses. I stared at it, the cursor blinking like a taunt. Perfect. My heart dropped as I envisioned empty beer cans rolling in the sand, as I heard the echo of a Bluetooth speaker thumping in the night breeze. What had been perfect in theory had become a prelude to devastation. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I drafted emails in my head, emails filled with polite regrets, careful demands, a recitation of violated terms that I hadn't agreed to in the first place. I rose at dawn and watched the horizon lighten, feeling my resolve sharpen like a blade against the surf. This house was not a playground. It was a monument to every struggle I had survived, a beacon of what hard work and sacrifice could build. I would protect it, even if it meant standing against my wife's family, even if it meant tearing down the polite walls they'd constructed around entitlement. Love, I realized, was not a shield against accountability. It was the reason to demand it. And so I steeled myself for what was to come, certain that boundaries, once drawn in sand, could still be reinforced in stone. My beach home wasn't a gift from the sky. It wasn't the legacy of inherited wealth nor the product of some stroke of luck. Every inch of its white stone exterior, every grain of the handcrafted wood panels inside, every pane of glass that framed the endless horizon was a monument to the 15-hour days I logged behind a desk, the missed vacations I mourned in cramped hotel rooms, and the failures that pushed me to fight harder. I can still feel the ache in my shoulders from the nights I hovered over analytics reports, searching for traction in metrics that refused to budge. I remember the sting of rejection when high-profile clients passed on my proposals, convinced that Wells Marketing was just another upstart with too much ambition and too little pedigree. Those early days taught me that success doesn't come wrapped in ribbon. It arrives in the form of grit, persistence, and a willingness to outwork everyone else. I spared no expense making this house perfect, not because I was trying to impress anyone, but because perfection was the only language that felt honest after everything I'd sacrificed. I envisioned a minimalist design where peace felt tangible, a living room dominated by floor-to-ceiling glass that dissolved the barrier between interior and ocean, allowing the Gulf breezes to wander freely through the open floor plan. I insisted on white stone that would reflect the sun's heat rather than trap it, and on interior furnishings crafted by local artisans whose names I could pronounce. I wanted each piece to have a story, a lineage of effort and expertise that mirrored my own journey. Even the kitchen appliances weren't off the shelf. They were custom-selected for efficiency and aesthetics, blending form and function in a way that made cooking feel less like a chore and more like a ritual. But beyond the luxury in the design lay something deeper. This wasn't just a house. It was a tangible declaration that I belonged here. It was the final pushback against every moment of doubt that ever whispered I wouldn't make it. I wanted it to be a place I could share with family responsibly. I envisioned laughter echoing off the walls during holiday gatherings, the smell of grilling seafood drifting across the deck, and the sight of children chasing fireflies in the dunes at dusk. Those were the moments I'd built this for: connection, memory-making, quiet mornings with coffee, and sunrise reflections. My parents understood that. They visited the first time just after I closed on the property. Dad walked the perimeter, running his hand along the stone and nodding in approval. Mom stood in the living room, eyes misting as she looked out at the water and whispered, "You did this." They didn't say congratulations or, "Well, aren't you fancy?" Instead, they said, "You earned it," and I felt the weight of pride settle in my chest. It was my inheritance of values, hard work recognized by those who knew the struggle behind it. Isla understood it, too. She'd stand beside me on the balcony as the sun dipped below the horizon, tucking her head beneath my shoulder and sighing, "We deserve this." I'd smile and kiss her hair, knowing that she still saw me as the scrappy kid from a working-class neighborhood, not the man whose signature now adorned property deeds. To her, this house was not a symbol of status, but of our shared dreams coming true. Her family didn't see it that way. To Alton and Diane, a house like this existed to be used, unchecked, unconstrained, unaccountable. I could almost hear Alton's voice crackling through the walls whenever I thought of him. "It's just a party house, right? What are a few scratches worth?" Their belief was that consequences were for everyone else. Privilege, in their eyes, granted immunity. A house on the coast was less a retreat and more an amenity to be exploited. I had a vague memory of Diane tossing her head as she evaluated the decor. White couches? Really? They must be impossible to clean. To her, my sacrifices melted away under the glare of practical inconvenience. I tried to remind myself not to take it personally. After all, they hadn't lived the nights I spent drafting contracts or the hours I waded through ad analytics alone. But boundaries aren't lessons you learn by osmosis. They're enforced, day after day, decision after decision. And so I took a deep breath and resolved that my home would remain a sanctuary of respect. I posted a copy of our property usage policy in the entryway, printed in simple black and white on thick cardstock. No unapproved guests, no damage to furnishings, no exceptions. I didn't expect anyone to read it, but its presence served as a manifesto, my way of saying that in this house, respect was mandatory. I watched Isla's face when she first noticed that policy tape by the front door. She blinked, hesitated, then slipped an arm around my waist. "Do you think they'll follow it?" she asked quietly. I shrugged and squeezed her hand. "They'll learn. Or they won't. But there'll be no gray areas." Her smile was nervous, but I could see the relief in her eyes. Relief that someone finally enforced the standards she valued. In the weeks that followed, I caught myself admiring the house in new light. It was no longer just a trophy. It was a fortress against entitlement. Every time I walked through the open-concept living room, feeling the ocean breeze mingle with the scent of freshly oiled wood, I reminded myself why I'd built it. For peace, for pride, for the promise that what I'd earned would be respected. And as long as I remained vigilant, this house would stand not just as a monument to endurance, but as proof that boundaries can be beautiful and necessary. The phone rang just as I was finishing the quarterly report I'd been agonizing over for 3 days. I glanced at the caller ID and saw Mom-in-Law blinking insistently. My stomach tightened. Those 2 words on my screen carried more potential for conflict than any client call ever could. I tapped the speaker button and braced myself. "Dorian, sweetheart," Diane's voice chimed, all honey concern and practiced warmth. "I need a favor. Bianca she broke up with that awful guy, got laid off, and she's in a fragile state. She needs a weekend to clear her head. A girl's weekend at your beautiful beach house." I swallowed. The image of my ivory sectional, still recovering from last summer's barbecue splatter, flickered through my mind. I closed my eyes. "Diane," I said slowly, "absolutely not." My tone was firm, non-negotiable. Bianca was a walking insurance liability, and I'd already drafted a property usage policy once this whole family fiasco began. I wasn't about to repeat that mistake. A pause. Then Diane's voice softened, edged with the guilt that women of privilege have perfected over generations. "Oh, Dorian, I understand. But she's so vulnerable. She doesn't have any close friends here. She just needs a safe place to regroup, that's all." I pictured a half-dozen college-aged cousins stumbling along the dunes at night, Bluetooth speaker bumping, beer bottles in hand. I pictured white stone exteriors scratched by nails, the handcrafted interior trampled by someone who didn't care it was someone else's sanctuary. My jaw clenched. "I'm sorry," I said, more gently than I felt. "But the house is not available." I hung up and exhaled, certain the conversation was over. 20 minutes later, Isla appeared at my office door. Her innocence was disarming. Rosy cheeks, hair pulled back in a loose braid, big brown eyes that always made me believe the best in her. I saw the familiar curve of guilt in her shoulders, the way she forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Dorian," she began softly, "they really think Bianca needs this." Her voice cracked. "They promised. 6 girls, no parties, no drama. Just sisters on the sand. I feel horrible saying this, but they wouldn't ask if it wasn't important." I ran a hand through my hair and pivoted to my desk, burying my eyes in spreadsheets. I could hear the ocean's distant roar outside my window, calling for peace, begging me to let go. But logic held me fast. I thought of the weekend ahead, the missed phone calls, the cleaning checklist, the repair bills. I thought of every boundary I'd tried to enforce and every time they'd shrugged it off. When I finally spoke, my voice was quiet but unwavering. "Isla, I love your sister, but this house isn't a crash pad. It's not a place to bleed dry." I saw tears well in her eyes. I sighed, knowing I was about to relent. "Okay," I said, meeting her gaze. "But on one condition, I draw up a binding weekend agreement. You and Bianca sign it. No unapproved guests. No damage beyond normal wear. Any violation, they're out." Her relief was palpable. She nodded, brushing away an escaped tear. "Thank you," she whispered. "I knew you'd understand." Later that day, at my dining table, I drafted what I called the Sister Weekend contract. I spelled out every expectation. Guest list capped at 6. No amplified music after 10 p.m. No alcohol left unattended. No open flames on the deck. Restoration fees for any damage. And a refundable security deposit. I laid it on the table and called Bianca, who arrived half an hour later with a suitcase slung over her shoulder and an impish grin on her lips. She skimmed the document, her eyes flicking from claws to claws, and then she looked up at me, lips curved. "You're really making me sign this?" she asked, voice teasing. I felt the old tension coil in my gut. Her casual cavalierness was infuriating. "I'm serious," I said, sliding a pen across the table. "Sign it, and you're welcome here." "Don't, and we're done." She sighed theatrically as though I'd demanded a blood oath. Still, she signed. Isla signed beside her, biting her lip, then met my eyes with gratitude. I collected the contracts, tucking them into a folder labeled Weekend Agreement, Sisters Only. I pinned a copy to the entryway bulletin board, black text on white cardstock, so no one could plead ignorance. I enforced my rules with the same resolve I'd enforced every other principle I believed in. That night, as I watched the headlights of Diane's car fade down the driveway, I thought of how this weekend would unfold. I imagined the laughter of 6 women walking barefoot on wet sand, the soft glow of lanterns on the deck, the clink of glasses over private confessions. I also imagined the worst: loud music, spilled wine, broken glass, stained stone, and me calling the insurance agent again. I stepped onto the balcony, inhaled the salty air, and closed my eyes, repeating a mantra. Boundaries keep love alive. Without boundaries, affection dissolves into entitlement. I reminded myself that love was not weakness. It was the courage to protect what mattered. But as the wind carried the first distant notes of a party down the beach, an echo I swore wasn't my doing, I felt a prickle of unease. I didn't know how they planned to bend my rules. I only knew they would try. My mind raced. Would they abide by the contract? Would they find loopholes? Would they laugh at the idea of a refundable deposit? I watched the moonlight shimmer on the water and braced for impact. Because I had kept my word on boundaries, but I didn't yet know the price I would pay for enforcing them. Little did I know I was about to be played by my own in-laws. Monday morning arrived with the oppressive weight of dread settling on my chest. I'd slept fitfully, haunted by dreams of splintered wood and shattering glass, and when dawn finally broke, I forced myself out of bed. My feet felt leaden on the polished wood floor as I made my way down the hallway, the house eerily silent except for the distant roar of the Gulf. I tried to steady my breath. This was my sanctuary, the fruit of every sacrifice, and I refused to let fear or anger seize me before I'd even surveyed the damage. I unlocked the front gate and stepped onto the crushed shell driveway. My eyes darted to the sand dunes beyond, where yesterday's footprints had been carried away by the tide. There was nothing but undisturbed sand now. Then I saw it. Empty beer cans tucked into the low shrubs, formerly hidden by fronds of sea oats. A half-dozen aluminum husks gleamed in the sun, their branded labels mocking me. My stomach clenched. I set my jaw and advanced to the porch. The moment I crossed the threshold, the smell hit me like a punch. Stale alcohol mixed with salt air and something foul: coffee grounds? No, vomit. I looked down at a dark smear on the cream-colored tile and felt bile rise in my throat. My hands curled into fists at my sides, knuckles whitening. I counted to 10. No shouting. No threats. Survey first. Respond later. I walked through the living room, where a Bluetooth speaker lay face down on the rug, its mesh grilled in it. The minimalist shelves that once held local pottery now stood barren, several pieces missing, the rest coated in dust. My eyes followed the glass walls to the deck, where the hammock post lay splintered like a tree struck by lightning. A matching rope had frayed beneath obvious strain, and the canvas was torn in two. I'd been to inspect a scorch mark on the wooden railing. My heart pounded. I could smell burnt wood and lipstick. Or was it spilled cocktail? Inside, the kitchen was chaos. Empty wine bottles strewn across the island, glasses tipped over like fallen soldiers, their ruby contents seeping into the marble. I ran a finger through the stain and tasted grape. The cabinet stood ajar, drawer fronts scratched, handles bent. I remembered the no open flames clause in the contract. Now I understood why it existed. A scorched ring surrounded a candlestick on the counter. Its base melted into a blackened crater. I moved deeper into the house, past the hallway lined with framed photos. Isla and me on our wedding day, our honeymoon in Santorini, until I reached the formal sitting room. My gaze caught on a crystal chandelier, once pristine and symmetric. Now a cluster of crystals lay shattered on the Persian rug, their fine points glinting like ice shards. I knelt, gathered a handful, and let them fall through my fingers, each one a sharp reminder of carelessness. The master bedroom was no sanctuary, either. Red wine stained the ivory couch that faced the bed. The stain spread like a dark cancer across the fabric. On the nightstand, my grandfather's pocket watch lay buried beneath overturned books and broken picture frames. I knelt to retrieve it, cradling the heirloom as though it might break again under this avalanche of destruction. Outside the bedroom window, I saw the deck bordering the dunes, where a large section of the handrail had collapsed, wood gouged as if by a giant's claws. I heard my phone buzz and glanced down. It was Isla. My throat tightened. I hit answer with a trembling thumb. Dorian. Her voice was hushed, uncertain. I've been trying to reach you. Is everything okay? I lifted my gaze to the shoreline, the morning sun glittering on the water. I swallowed hard. No, nothing's okay. I ended the call and dialed Bianca. My confidence returned with every ring, not to placate her, but because I needed her response on record. She picked up after 2 rings. Hey, Dee. How's the house? Did you have fun last night? Her tone was bright, oblivious. I closed my eyes. Bianca, I said evenly, we need to talk. There's damage everywhere. I'm sending you photos. I heard laughter in the background. Oh, come on. It couldn't have been that bad. I hung up and texted the insurance agent, summarizing the extent of the damage and requesting an immediate inspection. As I snapped pictures of every marred surface and every shattered artifact, I felt a slow-burning fury ignite. This house was my life's work, and they'd treated it like a frat barn. I counted 47 distinct items that needed repair or replacement, not including structural damage. My estimate nodded at $42,600, an amount that felt both precise and punishing. Half an hour later, I dialed Isla again. She answered on the first ring. Her voice trembled. Dorian, I can help with cleanup. I'll come over now. I pressed the speakerphone to the coffee table, where a broken wine glass lay, its jagged edge reflecting sunlight. Isla, I appreciate you wanting to help, but this isn't about cleaning. It's about accountability. I paused as I heard her inhale sharply. I need you to call your parents, and I need you to call Bianca. I waited in silence, the only sound the rush of Gulf waves outside. Finally, she spoke through tears. Okay, I'll do it. I dropped the phone onto the couch, careful to avoid the red wine stain still seeping toward me. I rose and walked to the open glass wall, letting the morning breeze whip through my shirt sleeves. I closed my eyes and let the wind carry away some of my anger. But the rest I bottled, to be dispensed in contracts and invoices and formal demands. Today wasn't about forgiveness. It was about boundaries. Today I would begin the hard work of repair and make my in-laws understand that this house, built on endurance and respect, would not tolerate reckless disrespect. I squared my shoulders and returned to the first room, ready to document every broken bit, every scorched spot, every shredded corner. Because in the aftermath of chaos, the only path forward was clarity, and I intended to chart it in unbreakable terms. I stood in the center of my living room, the remnants of the weekend's chaos visible on every surface, and waited for Alton, Diane, and Bianca to arrive. My pulse thumped against my temples, each beat reminding me that this moment was more than an argument. It was the test of everything I believed in. When the doorbell rang, I opened the door to find them standing on my threshold, Bianca with her trademark smirk, Diane fluttering with faux concern, and Alton with that half-smile that said he expected me to back down. I invited them in with a calm facade, though inside I felt as though I'd swallowed a live wire. I led them into the bright living room where shards of crystal still lay scattered under the chandelier's vacant socket. I placed my tablet on the coffee table and tapped it once. The screen lit up with photos of the wreckage. Diane's eyes widened at the sight of red wine stains snaking across the ivory couch. Alton's smirk faltered as he saw the melted candlestick crater in the marble countertop. Bianca rolled her eyes and crossed her arms, as if the images were nothing more than a bad vacation slideshow. I swallowed the urge to slam the tablet shut in her face. Let's talk about this, I said, voice measured. I tapped the screen. Broken chandelier, $3, $800. Smashed glass walls repair, $7, $200. Interior furniture cleaning and restaining, $4, $500. Deck post replacement and repainting, $2, $400. And that's before we get to the countless gouges in the wood floors, the ruined artwork, and the claim you violated on my insurance policy. I let the numbers hang in the air. The sum, a figure that wouldn't budge, glowed on the screen in bold, $42,600. Bianca shrugged and reached for a canopy on the sideline platter. It got a little wild, she said, as though she were describing a night out with friends. It happens. I watched her pop the canopy in her mouth and chew with casual indifference. My ribs burned with anger, but I bit back my retort. She needed to see that consequences weren't optional. Diane fluttered forward. "Dorian, darling," she said, her voice pitched to convey maternal soothing. "Bianca's just young. You're doing so well. You can afford a little generosity here." She smiled as though she'd offered me a bouquet of roses instead of undermining the very principles I'd built my life on. "Accidents happen at family gatherings," Alton added, folding his arms. "We all make mistakes. This wasn't intentional sabotage. It was a harmless weekend." He glanced at Bianca, as though seeking her approval, then looked back at me with that insider's grin. "Let's not make a mountain out of a molehill." I felt the room heat around me. They expected me to laugh off $42,600 in damage as though it were petty pocket change. My jaw clenched. I steadied myself on the arm of a broken side table, inhaled, and exhaled. Then I turned and smiled at Alton and Diane carefully, deliberately. It was the smile I reserved for moments like this, when kindness must be the drill that burrows down to steel. "You're right," I said softly. Their smiles blossomed. I could practically hear the collective sigh of relief. It wasn't intentional sabotage. It was negligence. I paused, letting the words settle. And in business, and in life, negligence has a cost. Their smiles wavered. I continued. "So, I'll handle it." I gestured toward the tablet. "I will pay for the repairs myself." Alton blinked. Diane's mouth fell open. Bianca chewed slowly, confusion creasing her brows. "What?" Bianca asked, voice low. "Wait, did you say you'll handle it?" She swallowed. I cut her off with a raised hand. I said I'll handle it. I'll settle with the contractors, cover the repairs, and remove this entire issue from our table. I folded my arms. But make no mistake, I'm not absorbing the cost because I'm wealthy. I'm absorbing it because I'm drawing consequences for negligence. Bianca will reimburse me in full. She will sign a repayment plan for the $42,600. We'll have a formal agreement outlining the schedule. Every month, she'll pay an agreed amount until the debt is cleared. Diane closed her mouth and glanced at Alton. Alton's gaze darted to Bianca. She swallowed the last of her canopy and set the empty plate on the coffee table, avoiding my eyes. "Dorian," Diane said, voice brittle now, "this is ridiculous. We're family." She paused as she realized the shift in power. "Bianca will pay you back, eventually." "Yes," I said, picking up the tablet. "And I'll send the draft repayment plan tonight. I expect signatures by tomorrow. If you default, I will pursue legal action." I slid the tablet across the table. The photos of broken glass and scorched wood glared up at them. "That's the invoice. That's the policy you violated. That's the formal demand." My eyes locked with Alton's. Parents of the bride owe a duty to uphold promises. You taught her to think consequences were optional. This is me holding you to that lesson. Silence filled the room. Bianca's cheeks flushed as she glanced at Diane and Alton, who looked unexpectedly small beneath the high ceilings. Then, with a reluctant nod, Bianca reached for the stylus and signed her name. Diane touched her own name beneath it, lips pressed thin. Alton hesitated, then added his signature as guarantor. A contract that once would have made them laugh now bound them in writing. I stood and gathered the documents. Relief, cool and hard, washed through me. I looked at Isla's empty photo frame on the mantel, our happiest moment, undimmed by conflict, and felt a surge of gratitude that I had taken this stand. I had protected my home and my values, even against those I loved most. And as Alton and Diane backed toward the door, brows furrowed in near respect, I recognized the first flicker of understanding in their eyes. They had learned that, sometimes, love means holding people, especially your own family, to the standards they deserve. They left without another word. I heard the front door click and their car pull away down the driveway. I locked the door behind me, then stood alone in the living room, breathing in the quiet. On the coffee table lay the signed agreement, no longer a contract of punishment, but a promise of responsibility. And in that moment, I knew that boundaries weren't barriers to love. They were the pillars that held it upright. That evening, after the last beam of sunset dipped beneath the gulf, I settled into my home office with Gideon Carmichael, my oldest friend and a contracts lawyer whose calm demeanor belied a ruthlessness I sometimes envied. The desk between us was strewn with invoices, estimates, and copies of my freshly updated property usage policy. I poured 2 glasses of ice water. Strong coffee would keep me pacing all night, and leaned back in my leather chair. "All right," I said, "help me make this bulletproof." Gideon adjusted his glasses and flipped open his laptop. "You want an invoice, a usage policy update, and a demand letter," he said, ticking them off on his fingers. He paused at the invoice. "We need to be precise. List each damaged item, the repair or replacement cost, and a total that reflects market rates. No padding, but no underestimating. If it goes to court, we need defensible numbers." I handed him my damage list. Chandelier, glass repair, deck post, furniture cleaning, floor refinishing, artwork replacement, and so on. Each line item bore my handwritten cost estimate, gathered from contractor quotes that morning. He nodded, entering line after line into a clean invoice template branded with my firm's logo and Wells Coastal Properties header. I watched as $42,600 crystallized on the screen, a figure that felt both exacting and punitive. When Gideon hit save, I felt that number settle like concrete in the room, no longer an abstraction but a demand. Next came the property usage policy. I'd already drafted a version after the first warning signs, but now it needed legal polish. Gideon and I went through it clause by clause. Guest limits, noise curfews, alcohol restrictions, no open flames, mandatory security deposits, and clearly stated liability for restoration. He added a clause requiring acknowledgement of my right to refuse future access for any breach, and another specifying that unsigned or unpaid agreements constituted immediate trespassing. His pen scratched in the margins, refining language until it left no loopholes for flippant excuses. Finally, the demand letter. Gideon explained its purpose: to communicate formality without cruelty. He began with a courteous greeting, "Dear Bianca," then recounted the events factually, referencing the signed sister weekend contract and the specific policy clauses that were violated. He listed the invoice total, demanded repayment within 30 days, and warned that failure to comply would trigger legal action, including court filing and potential additional costs for collection. Still, he closed with a line that surprised me. "I hope we can resolve this matter amicably and avoid further escalation." It softened the tone without weakening the content. When Gideon finished, I reviewed each document carefully, noting how the words on the page conveyed both resolve and restraint. I felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. This wasn't vengeance, it was accountability. I didn't want to hurt anyone, I wanted to teach a lesson. And these documents were my chosen instruments. I emailed the invoice and the updated policy to Bianca, with a formal cover letter summarizing the demand. I CC'd Isla's parents to make sure they understood the gravity of the situation. My finger hovered over the send button longer than I would like to admit. Then, with a final breath, I clicked send. The email swooshed into cyberspace, a digital gauntlet thrown at their feet. In the minutes that followed, I paced the office. The ocean breeze whipped through the open window, carrying the scent of salt and possibility. I poured myself another glass of water and tried to anticipate their reaction. Would they finally grasp that respect was reciprocal? Or would they see this as the final sign that Dorian Wells was a man far removed from the easy concessions they'd grown accustomed to? Sure enough, within the hour my phone buzzed. First, a flurry of angry texts from Bianca, accusations of betrayal, dramatized claims that I'd betrayed our family. "You know what you're doing," she wrote. "You're just proving you're cold and calculating." Then, a message from Diane. "Dorian, how could you do this to your sister?" Her words bore hurt, feigned or real. I couldn't tell. Alton's response came last. "We're disappointed. This could have been handled privately." I let the messages sit unread for a moment, resisting the urge to fire back impulsively. I opened each text, read it, then closed it again. No response. I had given them the 30-day window. There would be time for explanations later. For now, discipline demanded silence. Later that night, Isla found me at the kitchen counter, laid into the second pot of coffee for the evening. She looked as though she'd run a marathon in her mind, eyes red-rimmed, hair loose around her shoulders. She placed a gentle hand on my arm. "They're furious," she said softly. "And I'm sorry." I turned to her, softening at the sight of her distress. I wrapped my arms around her and held her close. "I know they are," I said, "but I did what I had to." My voice cracked. "I love you and your family. But love without boundaries just becomes enabling. She nodded and buried her face in my chest. I understand, she whispered. I'll support you. In that embrace, I felt the weight of tension lift slightly. I was no longer alone in this. Despite the storm of texts, Isla and I stood united in principle. Before bed, I drafted a brief note to Gideon. Thanks. Documents sent. We'll see how they respond. I hit send and powered off my laptop, willing the remainder of my adrenaline to calm. As I lay in bed beside Isla, I stared at the ceiling, replaying the night's work. The invoice and policy floated in my mind like two pillars supporting the future of my home. I closed my eyes, certain that tomorrow I would wake to a new chapter of accountability, whether met with gratitude or grudging compliance. Because in the end, I realized, respect couldn't be negotiated with excuses. It demanded clarity, structure, and follow-through. And after everything I'd built, I wouldn't settle for anything less. Word traveled fast through Isla's extended family, carried on sympathetic whispers and sharpened tongues, until I found myself cast as the villain in a drama I never auditioned for. Within days of sending the invoices and policy updates, my phone buzzed with calls and messages that cut deeper than any legal threat. Cousins I barely knew texted me to call off the lawsuit. Family first? Dorian, remember? An aunt I'd only met once at a Christmas brunch said I was cruel, that I should forgive and forget. Even my college roommate, who usually dispensed enthusiastic support for every business venture, urged patience. You're tearing your wife's family apart over some furniture. Each message seemed to say, I watched the barrage unfold from my home office, a place where clarity once reigned, now infiltrated by second-hand judgments. I closed my laptop with a resolute snap and stood, pacing the length of the room. The beach house, my long-sought refuge, suddenly felt like battleground ground zero. I wanted to explain to each critic the cost of respect, the price of entitlement, and the difference between loving someone and enabling them to behave without consequence. But the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I picked up my phone and dialed my mother. Mom, I said when she answered, voice tight. I described the tide of blame, the chorus insisting I was selfish, dramatic, cruel. She listened quietly, then her voice steadied mine with a single phrase I've carried since childhood. Don't bend, Dorian. You don't teach responsibility with free passes. Her words were both balm and battle cry. My parents had no beachfront home, no in-laws demanding spoils, but they knew the weight of hard work and the illusion of mercy without accountability. I held the phone for a moment longer, closed my eyes, and let my mother's conviction anchor me. I thanked her and hung up, steeling myself for what came next. That afternoon, I convened an emergency meeting with Isla and Bianca in the sunlit dining room overlooking the dunes. The long table, once adorned with Sunday roasts and holiday spreads, now served as the platform for impassioned pleas. Bianca sat at one end, arms folded, glaring at me as though I'd stolen her future. Isla sat beside her, torn between her sister and her husband, her expression pained but resolute. I took the head of the table, every muscle in my body alert. Bianca, I began, my tone calm but firm. I understand I've become the bad guy, but I need you to hear me. I let the silence stretch until my words found purchase. This isn't about money. It's about respect. When I built this house, every hour, every failure, every triumph was invested into these walls. It's more than a building. It's proof that hard work yields results. I glanced at Isla, who nodded encouragement. I'm not asking for miracles. I'm asking for accountability. Bianca's eyes darted away. She shifted in her seat, tugging at the hem of her shirt. You're tearing this family apart, she spat. It's just a house. You're making it into so much more. I leaned forward. It is just a house, I said softly. Just like you said. But it's my house. And you damaged it. Now you need to make it right. I opened the binder I'd placed before me, photographs, estimates, policy copies. Look, I said, flipping to the crystalline chandelier shards. This was $3,800 to replace. That's a week's rent for some people, maybe half a year's rent for others. It's real money. Money that supports my business, pays my bills, funds our future. Bianca's jaw tightened. Isla reached across the table and placed a hand on her sister's arm. Mia, she said, voice gentle, he's not trying to punish you. He's trying to teach you. Bianca ripped her arm away. Teach me? You've taught me more about money than about family. She paused. Then her gaze met mine, hard and unyielding. You think you can buy forgiveness with an apology invoice? I closed the binder and folded my hands. No, I replied. I don't think forgiveness is something you buy. I think it's something you earn. By accepting the consequences of your actions, you demonstrate you're worthy of trust again. There was a tremor in the chandelier's empty socket above us as a gust of ocean wind rattled the glass walls. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows on the table. The room seemed to hold its breath. Isla spoke then, her voice resolute. Dad says we don't teach responsibility with free passes. I believe that now more than ever. She looked at Bianca. You're my sister. I love you. But you have to step up. Bianca's facade cracked. I saw the first flicker of doubt in her eyes. She looked at the policy on the table, noise curfews, guest limits, security deposit clauses. What if I can't pay? She asked, voice small. I felt my heart twist at the edge of her confession. Then we figure out a plan, I said softly. Installments. Work assignments. Whatever it takes. But running away from this only proves you don't respect the work that went into this home. She sat back, her shoulders sagging. The room was silent except for the distant crash of waves. I realized in that moment that the real battle wasn't between a man and his in-laws. It was between entitlement and ownership, between avoiding responsibility and embracing growth. Bianca exhaled, glancing at Isla, then at me. Fine, she said finally, voice low. I'll figure it out. I closed the binder and slid it across the table. We'll start with your first payment next week, I said, and to the untrained ear it might have sounded like a sentence, but for me, it felt like the first line of a rehabilitation program, one that began not with blame, but with structure. Isla reached across, taking both our hands. In her eyes, I saw relief and faith. And in Bianca's a spark of understanding, fragile but real. As we sat there, three of us bound by conflict but committed to resolution. I knew that the shifting tides outside mirrored the change within these walls. The family had turned on me, yes, but through that pressure, they were discovering the bedrock of responsibility. And in standing my ground, I had shown them that love sometimes means being the hardest person in the room. By week 3, the tension had become a low hum beneath every conversation and text between myself and Isla's family. I'd settled into a rhythm of business mornings. Sketching ad campaigns, managing client calls, then drafting repayment tracking spreadsheets, only to find my evenings dominated by the fallout of the beach house debacle. Every time my phone buzzed, I braced for another wave of recrimination or excuse. And yet, in the quiet spaces between the storms, I sensed a shift, the first stirring of real accountability beneath the family's polished veneer. It began with Diane's call. I was reviewing Q2 performance metrics when my phone flashed her name. I hit speaker and steeled myself for platitudes or a tearful plea. Instead, I heard her voice crack. Dorian, I need to talk to you. It's about Bianca. My heart clenched. This could be a trap, another attempt to mollify me. What's wrong? I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. She's been evicted, Diane said, voice trembling. Her landlord changed the locks yesterday. Apparently, she didn't pay the rent. I don't know how she's going to manage without your forgiveness on this. My pulse quickened. Eviction? The idea of Bianca homeless, on the heels of her bill, felt like a cruel twist. But I remembered every scuffed floorboard, every shattered relic of my hard work. I closed my eyes and exhaled slowly. Diane, I sympathize. I do. But I didn't force her to throw a beach riot, violate the contract, and ignore her obligations. My words felt harsher than I intended, but I refused to soften. She's responsible for her actions. I'm happy to work out a repayment plan, but I'm not rescinding the debt. Another pause. Is that understood? She sniffled. I suppose so. Then, after another breath, I'll let her know. And the call ended. I stared at the phone, the Gulf breeze stirring the curtains, and felt no triumph, only resolve. I'd stood my ground. Now it was up to her to keep pace. Before I could dwell further, my phone buzzed again, this time Alden. I frowned and answered. Dorian, I'm offering $5,000 to settle the whole thing. Cash, no questions asked. We can call it even. His voice was casual, the tone of a man used to buying solutions. I pictured his smile, the same one he wore when dismissing every concern before. No, I said simply. I appreciate the offer, but it's insufficient. The full invoice is $42,600. I need payment in full or a structured plan to clear the balance. Otherwise, I'll file in court. I let silence fill the gap, letting him absorb the finality of my words. Fine, he snapped. You'll regret this. I hung up and turned to face the empty room. The water outside glimmered with late afternoon light, indifferent to our family turmoil. I sat at my desk, fingers poised over the keyboard. It was time. I composed the court filing, drafting a complaint that spelled out the contract breach, the damages, and the demands for relief. My hands trembled slightly as I attached the signed Sister Weekend contract and the updated property policy. Then I signed it and sent the documents to file with the county clerk. A final click, and the hammer fell. That night, Isla found me on the back deck, the sky stained with violet-blue dusk. She had her phone in hand, eyes red-rimmed. You filed, she said softly, her voice carrying regret. I nodded, feeling the weight of what I'd done. I had to, I replied. I gave them every chance to make it right. This is our last option. She looked out at the water, and I could see the conflict in her tears, relief that the issue was finally resolved, and sorrow at the damage it caused. She emailed this afternoon, she said, handing me her phone. I read Bianca's message. Do whatever you want. Go to court if you have to. This has shown me who you really are. A cold knot formed in my stomach. The words weren't news. They confirmed everything I already knew. I put the phone down gently. No, I said, surprising both of us. Isla blinked. I'm not going to hate her, I continued. I'm not trying to punish her forever. I'm proving who I won't be anymore, the person who lets entitled behavior slide. I waved a hand toward the horizon. I'm proving that boundaries aren't walls, they're the framework for trust. Isla reached for my hand, squeezing it. Over the next week, the court filing loomed between us. I heard whispers that Bianca's roommate had spread word of the party's profit. Bianca had charged attendees $25 apiece to rent the mansion. She turned my generosity into a side hustle. That news spread like wildfire among Alton and Diane's circle, igniting guilt and a dawning realization that their daughter had turned their enabling into opportunism. Then, one evening, the phone rang yet again. It was Diane, her voice trembling, but different this time. Dorian, we wanted to apologize. It wasn't just Bianca's fault. We failed her. We failed you. My chest tightened. Tears threatened, but I swallowed them down. Alton called next, his tone uncharacteristically somber. We're paying the invoice in full, he said. We're wiring the funds tonight. And Bianca will start repaying us monthly. We've signed the updated policy for good measure. I exhaled, relief and vindication flooding me. Thank you, I said quietly, knowing those words meant more now that they were earned. That weekend, I watched the bank confirmation ping onto my phone. $42,600 in crisp digital columns. I forwarded the confirmation to my insurance broker and contractors, closing the file on my end. The solitude of the house felt different, lighter, as though the air itself recognized the restoration of order. I sat on the deck chair, coffee cups steaming in my hands, and looked out at the horizon where sky met sea. In that expansive silence, I reflected on the journey. The initial concession to just a quick girls' weekend, the chaos that followed, the invoices and policies, the family backlash, and the court filing. It had been a crucible, forging something new in all of us. Isla joined me, leaning into my shoulder. You did it, she whispered. I nodded, tasting the salt on her skin from unshed tears. We did it, I said, because without her resolve to stand by those same principles, none of this would have mattered. As the morning light gilded the waves, I realized that Turning Point wasn't just for a dispute over a house. It was proof that love held firmest when boundaries were drawn with clarity and upheld with conviction. And in that promise, I found the strength to move forward together. With the family I'd married into, finally ready to share my home on terms of mutual respect, when Isla's parents pulled up unannounced 2 weeks later, I braced for conflict. I found Diane in the living room, her shoulders slumped, eyes red-rimmed, and Alton standing awkwardly by the sliding glass door, avoiding the wreckage that still bore faint scars. They hadn't come to argue. They'd come to listen. Diane's voice quivered as she began. Dorian, we've talked to Bianca's roommate. She swallowed. She told us the truth. Bianca charged people $25 each to attend the party. She called it renting out your house. My chest tightened at the betrayal. Isla's family not only ignored my rules, but turned my generosity into profit. But that anger subsided quickly, replaced by a sense that this conversation was years in the making. Alton stepped forward. His usual smirk was gone, replaced by something like humility. "We failed you," he said, voice low. "And we failed Bianca. We thought we were helping her, but we enabled her." He met my gaze, unflinching. "We want to make it right." I nodded, studying the faces of two people who had once dismissed my concerns. "Thank you," I said quietly. "What matters now is action." Diane reached into her purse and pulled out a checkbook. Her hands trembled slightly as she handed me a check for $42,600. "Payable to Wells Coastal Properties," she said. "We'll wire the rest this afternoon." I took the check, feeling its weight not in ink and paper but in the recognition of responsibility. Alton cleared his throat. "And Bianca will be on a structured repayment plan for any future access," he added. "We want to sign the updated policy today." He produced the booklet I had drafted with Gideon weeks ago, the one they'd scoffed at. Now they flipped through its pages reverently, pen poised to commit themselves to every clause: guest limits, curfews, deposits, and liability. Isla appeared behind them, tears in her eyes. "I'm proud of you both," she whispered. I felt her hand slip into mine, a silent gesture of unity. We gathered around the dining table, the same one that once hosted escalating arguments, and signed. Each signature carried the weight of accountability, each crossed X, a bridge toward genuine respect. When they finished, I closed the booklet and placed it on the table, feeling a profound sense of closure. Diane looked at me, her eyes bright. "I'm sorry, Dorian," she said simply. "I see now that respect must be earned and boundaries honored." Alton nodded. "We've learned that rules aren't restrictions, they're assurances of harmony." I offered them my gratitude. "It means more than you know," I said. "Thank you for listening." They lingered for a moment, as though unwilling to let go of this lesson. Then Diane embraced me, her arms genuine for the first time, and Alton clasped my shoulder. The warmth I felt in that embrace was far richer than any trophy I could have acquired. Later, alone with Isla, I walked her through the house, showing her minor repairs already completed and the freshly cleaned upholstery. The house looked almost new, a testament not just to contractors' work, but to the intangible restoration of trust. Isla smiled and leaned against the glass wall overlooking the water. "We did it," she said softly. I wrapped an arm around her. "We did," I agreed. "And now we share this home on terms that honor everyone's efforts." As the Gulf breeze stirred the curtains, I understood that the true inheritance of family was not entitlement, but the capacity to grow through mistakes. In that moment, my beach house became more than a monument to endurance. It became a living symbol of accountability, respect, and the love that flourishes when boundaries are honored. 6 months passed like the tide, rising and receding with the steady rhythm of our restored lives. Each morning, I walked the shoreline alone, letting the Gulf's cool salt water wash away the memories of that disastrous weekend. The house, once a battleground of entitlement and consequence, now felt like the sanctuary I'd always intended, a place shaped by hard work and mutual respect instead of chaos and resentment. One afternoon, I checked my email and froze at the subject line, "From Bianca." My chest tightened, memories of shattered glass and midnight laughter surfacing unbidden. I clicked it open and read her words slowly, letting their sincerity sink in. "I was awful. I lied. I damaged something that mattered to you, and I treated you like a doormat. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want to be better." The honesty in her admission was humbling. In that moment, I realized that accountability wasn't only about restitution, it was about change. I invited her to the cafe where Isla and I first met, the one with the weathered barstools and the salt-stained windows. Bianca arrived with cautious steps, her usual confidence replaced by hesitation. She slid into the seat across from me, eyes downcast. I offered a small smile and nodded, giving her space to speak. "I owe you more than money," she said, voice soft. "I owe you respect." She met my gaze, and I saw in her the person who had once treated my home like a playground. But I also saw someone transformed by responsibility. "Thank you for not backing down," she continued. "You could have hated me. Instead, you taught me that actions have consequences, and that honesty and boundaries can actually bring people closer." I leaned back and folded my hands on the table. The memory of that $42,600 invoice surfaced, not as a wound, but as a lesson learned. I could have let it go, I admitted. But then I would have lost more than a house. I would have lost the values I built my life on. She nodded, tears glinting in her eyes. We spoke for an hour, sharing stories of growth. Hers about newfound determination at work and my parents' pride at seeing their son stand firm. By the time we left the cafe, the gulf between us felt bridged by a genuine understanding. Back at the beach home, I watched as Bianca helped Isla hang new artwork, her careful hands placing framed prints on freshly painted walls. Later, we gathered for a family dinner on the deck, contracts and deposits forgotten in the warm glow of shared laughter. My parents raised glasses to toasted marshmallows, to reconciliations, to a future built on trust. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I stepped away and gazed at the water, reflecting on how far we'd come. This house remained more than white stone and glass. It was proof that respect must be earned, that boundaries foster growth, and that love, true love, sometimes means insisting on accountability. In the soft hush of dusk, I felt at peace. My dream beach home had become exactly what I'd always wanted, a place where family could gather, honor hard work, and share life's highs and lows with honesty intact.